my laptop died in Amsterdam the night before I was supposed to give the first of 4 presentations. So I had to go buy a new one, and I didn't notice that Apple changed everything again. So bear with me for a sec. Also, I can't type on this thing. Like, the keyboard is totally different, and backtick is not where I expect. I'm gonna have to switch to Emacs again or something. Haha, yeah, that's right. I use Vim. Good morning. I'm so happy to be here. Actually, I love these hand-curated single-track conferences where you have such an amazing diversity of people in the audience, because people aren't self-selecting to go just listen to the thing that they like the most. And I don't know. When it's good, and when it's bad, it's terrible. And I'm really sorry I missed yesterday, but I was hungover and jet-lagged as fuck. Anyway, today I want to talk about bootstrapping an ops team. There's so much ground to cover here, right? Because as an industry, we're super bad at interviewing, we're super bad at hiring, training, team building, culture fit. Like, we could be here for a really long time. So the way I'm going to try and narrow this is by pitching it more specifically towards founders and small software engineering teams who are just starting to think about questions like, what is operations? What does it mean? Do we need an ops? How do we get an ops? How do we not, sorry, I swear a lot. How do we not screw it up? And to me, I'm old school. My heart is with operations. I call myself an operations engineer, but really, this encompasses everything from site reliability engineering to, scalability to architecture and design, DBA work, DevOps, as the kids these days like to say. Really, operations means anything related to designing, building, maintaining really complex systems at scale. So, tiny bit about my background. I'm currently a production engineering manager at Facebook. How many of you here have seen Silicon Valley? Big head who's unassigned? That's me right now. I'm on the roof. I've got nothing to do. But Parse was my baby. I just left Parse, but I spent 3.5 years building Parse, which is a platform for mobile apps. And production engineering was the team that does all the operational DBA infrastructure type work so we were basically doing operations engineering for over 500,000 apps. And before that, I was the first engineer hired in the infra side for a bunch of other companies. It's a role that I really love, being the first person to come in and really build things correctly from the ground up. I feel very strongly about that. And then recruit and hire and build a team and the culture as it grows. Each of these places, I've been a very early hire and, taking it through 10x, repeatedly. I love explosive growth. So, hiring and building ops teams, I've done this repeatedly. I've done it really well sometimes, and I've made a lot of mistakes. I personally have fucked this up in more ways than I can count. So I have a ton of thoughts and feelings on the topic. So there are basically 3 parts to this story, right? Do you actually really need an ops team? Don't assume that the answer is yes, right? This is a pretty polyglot crowd, so let's definitely start there. Do you really need one? Are you ready to make the changes to your workflow to utilize one effectively? And then, what qualities make for a great startup ops hire? I'm assuming most everyone here is pretty much in the startup space. Anyone here not in the startup space? Seriously? Holy shit. Okay. All right. Interesting. Well, I will spend extra time on the differences then between hiring for a small startup and for a large company, because I think that's super interesting. And third, like, how do you interview and sort for those qualities that will help your business succeed? So let's start with the first question. Do you need an ops team? If you're a small team of software engineers at a startup, probably you don't. A lot of people who think that they need ops teams actually just need someone to care really deeply about the health of their infrastructure. That doesn't have to be a special role, right? It doesn't have to be a dedicated. Engineers are expensive. I don't know if you've noticed this. You definitely, this does not have to be a dedicated role for most teams, and your software engineers should never feel like they're off the hook for operational excellence. So like there's this particular anti-pattern that we've seen startups do over and over again, where you're a little startup, software engineers, you figure out how to use AWS, you figure out how to deploy code, like it's not rocket science. And at some point, if you're growing and your startup is doing really well, you turn a corner and the software engineers who are doing most of the infrastructure work get very, very unhappy. Because infrastructure work is not their core skill set. It's not what brings them joy. It's not what they wake up wanting to do every day. And so they start feeling really burned out and frustrated. And this is what they say. They're like, we need an ops team. And maybe they're right. Like, maybe. But maybe not. Not to be heretical here, because I am an operations engineer, but like, let's be clear that operations engineering at any kind of scale is a very specialized skill set, right? It's not software engineering lite or junior varsity for software engineers. It is not getting someone to do all the shit work of manning deploys, building the build pipeline, getting all the pages in the middle of the night, owning service reliability so that your developers are let off the hook, so that they can just live in an ivory tower and never have to think about it again. If you're hiring an ops team, you're not hiring someone to take over the shit work that your developers don't want to do. You need to understand that you are looking for and trying to hire people who know things that you do not about building and maintaining systems at scale. So, in the year 2015, right, you wouldn't hire an operations engineer who can't write some code. You also shouldn't hire a developer who doesn't have some operational skills and the ability, desire, or at least willingness to learn how to own their services from end to end. You can get a long way with a few software engineers who are willing to do their jobs correctly. Instagram had 0 ops people when they sold to Facebook for $1 billion. They had like 8 people, and none of them were ops. And having seen their early architecture, in some ways it shows, but it didn't exactly hold them back, right? What they did have was a really rigorous operational mindset, and they chose really boring technology. Right? There's a great blog post out there where they talk about their early stack, and it's like, it's dead simple. Every single element of the stack is at least 10 years old. But that's great, because you can fix shit. You need an ops team if you have hard operational problems. And if you do, the sooner the better, right? You're not going to attract top-tier operations talent unless you're offering real hard problems of reliability or scale. So let's talk about what it means to have hard operational problems. One category of hard operational problems is extreme reliability demands. That fifth nine. Or extreme security demands. I remember talking to Square 3 or 4 years ago when they were actually still a startup, and they're like, we can never drop an API request. Period. We will post-mortem it if we can tell that like 100 API requests failed. I'm like, Jesus Christ. But Stripe is the same way, right? Some of their worst outages over a multi-year period have been, our API was unavailable for 2 whole minutes. But these guys are dealing with people's money, right? So it makes sense. They may not have actual problems of scale. Honestly, if you look at the QPS that these guys are doing, it's not these people are doing. It's not that huge. But they have highly controlled environments where high security and extreme reliability are the difference between success or failure. Their customers have to trust them to be available. Not everyone has extreme reliability demands, you know? Don't waste precious engineering hours chasing that 4th or 5th 9 if it's not what's going to make or break your company. Like, most startups fail, and it's usually not because their website was down for 30 seconds a week. Another category of hard problems is your rate of growth, right? If you're 5xing or 10xing year over year, you're basically building an entire new infrastructure every time you 10x, right? Google has this philosophy that you should never even try to design or anticipate what your technical problems are going to be more than 10x of where you are now, because you're going to have too many stupid assumptions baked into it. Like, your problems are not going to be what you think they will be. I think that's really smart. But if you're basically designing and implementing a new infrastructure every 1 to 3 years, you need people who can intelligently do that and not learn everything on the fly. Another category of hard problem is you want to solve some core operational problem for the entire internet, right? I feel like right now, the thing that happened to email 10 years ago is happening to monitoring, right? Where it used to be we all ran our own mail servers and our own spam assassin and all this shit, and then Gmail came along, we were all like, oh, actually running email systems isn't core to our business. Maybe we can get away with someone else doing that. I think this is happening to monitoring now, right? There are a lot of people out there in the space, don't know who's going to win, but they're trying to solve some core operational problem for the internet. They need really good ops people. So let's say that you do have hard operational problems and you've decided you need an ops team. Like, congratulations. Seriously, this means you're really doing something right. You must have customers, revenue, funding, really interesting problems. Good job. So, take a moment to feel really good about yourself. Now let's move on. Now you need to start the hard work of bootstrapping an ops team. There are a few points I want to touch on in this section. What qualities make for good startup hires versus established company hires? And what are the special challenges of making your first hire for any new team? So let's say you're a tech founder. You've just decided you need an operations engineer to join and help the team solve some really hard problem. And in your mind, you're making a list of absolute must-have critical qualities for this hire to have, and probably it looks something like this. And while we're at it, like, it'd be super cool if they just really believed in your mission and aren't asking for much of a salary or equity, and they're just cool with, like, you know, a stipend and some free snacks, right? So you want a unicorn. And of course you do. Everybody does, because unicorns are amazing. But you don't get one. Instead, you get an engineer, hopefully, if you're lucky, with strengths and weaknesses, specific experience and skills, and a very specific background that may or may not be relevant to what will actually make your business succeed. Nobody's good at everything. Even those of us who have done certain things, like, deeply, have probably forgotten or recycled most of those brain cells with whiskey. So honestly, this isn't a problem, right? I would say that the key attribute that all top shelf operations engineers that I know share is they're really good at learning whatever the fuck they need to, like on the fly. 2 a.m., sites down, suddenly you're an expert in Redis. But I will say, in my experience, that a very strong predictor of success for an operations engineer at a startup is what I've heard referred to as a T-shaped engineer. Like, they're broadly literate, they can talk up and down the stack, some degree of detail, but they have done a deep dive into at least one area, right? This is not about what boxes can you tick off on the list of technologies that you've used. When Parse was interviewing me to be their first infra hire, I had literally never used AWS, Ruby, Rails, Go, Mongo, Cassandra, Chef, Redis, anything. Anything that they were using. But I could speak broadly to the kinds of scaling problems that they were likely to have. And I had an experience going deep as a MySQL DBA and repeatedly 10xing major services. And that's what they cared about. I actually think they did a really good job of interviewing me because they didn't pay attention to the checkboxes. They paid attention to, can she go broad? Can she go deep? All right. There are a few qualities that I think great operations engineers share. They're basically allergic to doing the same thing more than once. They don't have to be superstar programmers. But they have to be irritated at doing the same thing by hand repeatedly and good enough at writing code to make that happen, right? Great operations engineers feel ownership over their systems. They feel personally offended when their stuff breaks. This often manifests as a problem because you can't get them to take vacation. Bridget. Great engineers, and this is like not just operations, but this is like great engineers, period, have strong opinions on a wide range of technical topics, right? We all do, but they're not dogmatic about them. There is nothing worse than working with a religious zealot. For example, I prefer Chef to Puppet. I can argue at great length over many drinks why Chef is absolutely superior. But if I came into a company that already had a robust Puppet ecosystem, I'm not gonna fucking ask them to change that. That would be stupid. And that's not a made-up anecdote. I know a company that did this. They had Puppet working, hired a great Chef engineer who started converting everything to Chef. 3 years later, they're still running both on the same nodes. Anyway, all great operations engineers try to simplify and reuse their architecture, right? They know that using one database that's 70 to 80% is good as the optimal solution, but using that 5 ways is better than having to run 5 databases. Like, complexity exacts a staggering tax on your humans. And the bread and butter of operations engineering is trying to pay down and minimize that tax. Operations engineers value process, and not because it's super fun. Writing postmortems, Process, though, is what prevents you from making the same mistakes over and over and over and over again. This is one of the biggest things that operations teams can bring to software engineering. A healthy respect for process. And empathy. Like, this is important in an engineer. This is really what the DevOps movement is about, right? It's not about hiring DevOps engineers because fuck that noise. It's about navigating the constant tension between the need to ship code fast, to write features, to change things, to make your business succeed and grow, and the need to keep systems stable, secure, and understandable by humans. DevOps just means that everybody shares responsibility for these things, right? Operations engineers are responsible for helping developers ship code as fast as they need to. Developers are responsible for helping keep the site reliable and up, being in the on-call rotation. And I'll just say anecdotally, every amazing operations engineer I know is a wizard at Bash. So what's not on that list? Being really good at whiteboarding code. I am so over using whiteboards in interviews. Never again. But a team of software engineers will often make this mistake when they're hiring for their first ops person. They'll just ask them junior SWE questions, software engineering questions, or just judge them according to a really low software engineering bar. This is a terrible strategy. I also want to talk about the big company pedigree issue. This one is kind of controversial. Like, VCs love funding teams that have a Google or a Facebook pedigree. And in general, everyone seems to assume that having worked at one of these big companies is a strong predictor of quality. And it is for a very particular definition of quality. Engineers who have worked at your Googles and your Facebooks have definitely demonstrated very superior skills with data structures and algorithms. They have also demonstrated their ability to operate very well in very large and structured environments on probably a slice of 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 a problem that was come up with by someone else. So I think this is a trap, right? You're selecting for different criteria at a startup than at a large company. If your engineer from a big company has been at that big company for many years, also, they don't live in the real world when it comes to software. They just don't, right? Google engineers don't deal with GitHub, Nginx. I have this friend who is a senior, amazing, kick-ass SRE manager at Google who's like, what's a lamp stack? And you're just like, okay, they can learn. They can totally learn. They're smart, right? But they're starting at a remedial level. There can also be a sort of learned helplessness that sets in after a long time at a big company, which is not helpful at a startup. So the qualities that make you successful at a big company are sometimes the opposite of the ones that make you really phenomenally successful at a startup. At a big company, you have a safety net, right? You may have access to some of the world's greatest experts. That can be really nice. Like, I'm not going to lie, being at Facebook and being able to go talk to the person who just wrote the database engine that you're trying to, make work is amazing. At a startup, like, the buck stops with you. Some people really thrive on this pressure, and some people get extreme anxiety. The site is down, either you figure it out or the company dies. I love it. Not everyone does. Operations at a startup, though, is fundamentally a very reactive role. Every role at a startup is a very reactive role because you have to change course very quickly to try and survive and succeed. At a big company that's doing it right, it's not. Some people can traverse these boundaries and excel in both environments. It's hard. It's rare. Most of us are more comfortable in one or the other. So if an engineer has never worked at a startup before and you're trying to hire them for one, you're taking a risk. It's similar to taking on the risk of like your first remote hire for a team. They don't know if they're going to like it or be good at it. You don't know. So we've talked a lot about what makes for really good startup versus large company operations engineers. Let's talk a little bit about the interview process. and how to identify the qualities that you need. First, the obvious, this is hard. This is really hard. And as an industry, we are really bad at it, like really phenomenally bad at it. We are much better at looking for reasons to say no to someone than to say yes and look for their potential and develop it. One of the best network engineers that I have ever had the pleasure of working with was our receptionist at Linden Lab. We just started taking him to the colo with us to help us rack hardware, and he just started picking stuff up, and he's now just a god. He's a network engineering god. Like, people have so much potential, but it is a risk. Anyway, detour. So, a few suggestions on how to interview ops candidates. If you're coming into this as something of a blank slate, like if this is not your core competency, spend some time doing the job yourself, right? Get familiar with the day-to-day challenges, the things that where you're spending your time, because then you can ask more intelligent questions of the candidate who's in front of you. And this actually, like much of this applies to all roles, not ops specifically. Like at Parse, when they were looking for their first operations engineer, like the founders did ops work. They were on call. They were trying to write the deploy pipeline. Same thing when they decided to hire their first sales engineer. They went out and started doing sales. They were terrible at it, but it's fine. Like, they were able to more intelligently screen and ask better questions. You'll be more literate about the problem set. How many people here have read The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz? Okay. Now, I basically hate venture capitalists, and I also hate business books, but I nevertheless highly recommend this book. It's amazing. And I owe a lot to him for this section. So you don't get a magical unicorn developer operations goddess. You get a person with very specific strengths and skills. So you need to figure out what strengths you need and care about those. And even just the process of figuring out what strengths and skills you need can be incredibly valuable and clarifying. But don't hire for lack of weaknesses, right? You can live with some weaknesses, but you have to because everyone has them, right? If you're hiring for lack of weaknesses, you'll miss out on some really amazing candidates who can be highly effective for you. If you're hiring a founding team member, technical leadership is a very particular strength that you need to hire for. You need to hire for someone who has the key talent of being able to build teams as well as infrastructure. You may need to trade off something else on your wish list to get that particular skill. And when you're hiring subsequent people for the team, look at the existing weaknesses of the people who are on the team. And it's like playing Jenga with people, you know? You're not looking for singular superheroes. You're looking to build a strong team with a healthy composite of skills. Like, I'm terrible at monitoring and graphs and alerting. I know it's important. I will do it. But I hate it. I hate building that shit over and over. So the first engineer that I recruited to work with me at Parse was my friend Ben Hartshorn, who I had worked with at Linden, and he loves it. I don't understand why. He's insane, but like, we work really well together because, and he hates databases, so it's like, we're the perfect match, right? Being realistic and honest about your weaknesses and just like figuring out ways to deal with them is so much better than trying to convince yourself or someone else to be completely well-rounded and perfect. And by the way, I think big companies are really bad at this. In my experience, the bigger the company gets, the more they hire for lack of weaknesses instead of powerful strengths. I think it's greatly to their detriment. They can afford to do it because there are tens of thousands of people who are applying to work at Google and Facebook every year. So they can just, pick the few who completely ace the 5 random quizzes that they got asked, right? So there are a lot of amazing engineers out there who won't get hired by Google and Facebook, and that's great because the rest of us, you, I don't know, get to benefit from that. Sorry, I haven't figured out what I'm doing next in life. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what makes for good interview questions and bad interview questions, right? Good questions are leading and broad and have many correct solutions, and their purpose is to help you understand how this person thinks, what context they bring to the table, how creatively they approach the problem solving. I think we talked about T-shaped engineers before, and I think it's always a good idea to tease out the balance of breadth versus depth that an engineer has. Can they talk intelligently about problems up and down the stack? This is another area where, there are different archetypes of engineers. Some types of engineers really only love going deep. And some types of engineers get really, really irritated when you ask them to work on the same thing 2 days in a row, right? That's fine. But if you're at a startup and you're hiring a first engineer for your team, you probably don't want the type that only wants to go deep, right? You probably want to err more on the side of the breadth archetype. and dive deeply into their self-reported strengths. If you're giving them a coding test, all right, true story. I have a friend who has a startup, and she's like, I can't seem to hire any operations engineers. What's wrong? Like, I get lots of candidates. I can't hire them. I'm like, well, tell me about your interview process. And she's like, well, a couple systemsy things. And then I lock them in a room with a laptop and no network and ask them to write something with a JavaScript DOM. I'm like, the fuck? Seriously? Don't do that, right? Don't ask someone to solve a problem without the resources that they would have in real life. I don't see a problem with, a candidate looking up something and stack over. Like, let them use their laptop. Ask them if they're comfortable pair programming or if they would rather just, sit with the interviewer, quietly in the room while they work away on it with their headphones on, talking through questions, asking questions, whatever. Put people at ease. Let them work in the way that they feel most comfortable. Like, you do want to tease out whether or not they can write code or not, but you're not testing for people who don't get nervous when you're watching over their shoulder. It's just not the point of this exercise. I also, the next time I'm in a position where I'm doing a lot of hiring and interviewing, I think I'm going to experiment with things like sending them the questions the night before, being like, here, take your time, write this code. Because how much good code can someone really write in 45 minutes, right? Take a couple hours, do it, then bring it in and let's talk about it. I get so much more signal from hearing how people talk about how they solve the problems than actually watching them write code in real time. Another strategy that I've seen people do that I really like is for systems-y people, take VMs, break them, and then work through why they're broken with them. I think that's brilliant. I like the sample questions like, hey, the site seems to be slowing down. Our average latency is double what it was at this time yesterday, and we have no idea why. Where do we start? You want someone who's pretty cool under pressure. I also love to ask people, what is the worst disaster that you have ever experienced and or caused? Do you want to be up at 3 a.m. debugging a problem with this person? Because you probably will be. Can they keep their sense of humor under pressure? Because it is such a relief to work with people who find disasters hilarious. Not terrifying. Well, terrifying / hilarious. It's all kind of the same little brain neurons firing. Ask culture questions. Don't ignore this part. Ask how they feel about their former jobs and their former colleagues, right? What were the best things and the worst things about their past jobs? It's okay to have had 1 or 2 bad experiences. I think we all have if you're over 30. But if the candidate is just reciting a litany of teams that were shitty, like coworkers who sucked, other people's mistakes, like, tales of woe, and it was miserable, and everybody should have done everything differently, like, this is not your hire. Like, whenever somebody complains about a past job, ask them how they tried to change it. And if they didn't, don't hire them. Especially at a startup. You can get away with a lot of learned helplessness at a large company because, honestly, your potential for impact is lower. But it's kryptonite for a startup. It will kill your startup if your engineers do not feel personally empowered and accountable for the culture and for the systems. Reid Hoffman said this the other week. And in fact, he went even further and said, if you told me pick one, just one, you can either interview the engineer or get references, not just the references they provide, but like talk to people who have worked with them. I would pick references every day of the week. And I absolutely agree, right? I think that there's no question that personal experience and personal referrals are the single best way to tell how well a person learns on the job, which is something that is, as far as I can tell, almost impossible to tease out in an interview. That said, relying too much on personal networks is also kind of problematic, right? We don't want to be a closed system. We want to be diverse. We want to be open to new people. How do you balance like parity and openness and bringing new people into the field versus like getting really good personal recommendations? This is a really hard question. I personally know it feels like everyone in San Francisco, so I do rely heavily on personal referrals, but I try to really broaden and diversify my personal network to compensate. Anyway, so let's say you've hired an ops engineer. You think they're amazing, they're coming up to speed, things are going great. So what's next, right? Do you just hand them the keys to the kingdom, turn over all responsibility, reassign, pager, heave a sigh of relief, and get on with the business of writing software? And no, you do not, right? Your software engineers still have to care just as much about the health and reliability of their own services. Your operations engineers, and they should be on call. They must be on call. I feel very strongly that developers should own their own services. Operations engineers are an incredibly powerful resource to help software engineers get better at doing that. This means shared pager rotations. This means including your operations engineers in the development of each product from the very first design and architecture discussion. Give them a stake, give them a stake in the game. This is table stakes. And again, this is what DevOps means, or what it's supposed to mean. Leveraging specialized skill sets in the interest of a shared goal with a high level of empathy between teams. Before we close, I want to briefly run through a few anti-patterns. Bad operations engineers will wall off production from developers. Your ops people may have a certain amount of fear when it comes to developers working directly on production. That's natural. It's deserved. But they should channel that fear into education and documentation and making the services more resilient and understandable and predictable, not in walling off production from developers and insisting on doing everything themselves. One of my favorite questions when I'm talking to startups is, does everyone have sudo? I think they should. I think everyone in the company should have sudo. This may be one of these aspirational things that is not actually practical in reality, like if you have like SOX compliance or whatever, but I think it's an interesting thought process, like why wouldn't you give someone root? Do you not trust them? Why? Let's talk about it. Good ops people simplify. If your ops people are adding complexity, they are anti-ops. They are the antichrist of operations. Good engineers will admit when they don't know things, right? This is how you know that you can trust them when they do say that they know something. Good engineers aren't afraid to ask stupid questions or look dumb, although a lot of the burden here is on you as a leader to create a culture where it's safe to own up to not knowing things and to not being perfect and to making mistakes. Bad ops people don't care about customer experience. In a really properly functioning ops team, their pain is exactly aligned with your customer's pain. They are getting paged at 3 a.m. when and only when your customers are also experiencing pain at 3 a.m. If your ops team is optimizing for their experience instead of the customer experience, then your team is broken. So basically, if your ops team is doing any of these, if anyone in your team is doing any of these things, course correct if you can and fire them if you can't. Well, now let's talk about how to lose really good ops people. Give them all the responsibility and the accountability for scaling and maintaining a reliable service, but no support from software engineers. You know, if they say something's broken and you don't fix it and they keep getting paged about it, they should quit. Likewise, don't just assume that because operations or infrastructure is in their title, that they're then completely responsible for the million little tiny 10-minute jobs that are involved in building and maintaining infrastructure at scale. You know, writing init scripts, deploying software, writing cron jobs, writing chef cookbooks. You know, your entire engineering team needs to share the burden of the interrupt-heavy types of operations work. And one of the fastest ways to lose good ops people is to have a really blameful culture. Like, literally everyone will eventually cause some kind of production problem, or they're probably not being effective. Like, everyone. These failures are inevitable in complex systems, and the responsibility is shared by the entire organization. And you will lose good ops talent if you have no interesting problems. This is a really strong argument for not hiring in advance of actually having interesting problems. So I'm basically about done. I just want to make a pitch for treating your people really, really, really well. And I definitely don't mean buying them lots of snacks and meals and offsites and gym memberships and all the things that every fucking startup has on their perks list. But I mean, like, actually caring about them as human beings and people and trying to do what's best for them. Caring about your culture and being thoughtful and respectful and inclusive and not tolerating assholes. I mean, also, like, encouraging healthy work-life balance. Like, pay attention when people aren't taking their vacation time. Help them work out a schedule that works for them and their families and their personal lives. I worked at this one startup where the founders consistently called out and glorified every time there was a release, when the engineers were in the office, sleeping on the couch, coding till 4 a.m., scrambling furiously to get it out on time. And they would just fawn all over these guys. They're like, oh, such heroes. Oh, you got it in just under the deadline, you know. They saw this as a sign of success and excitement and passion. And actually, every single time, it was a sign of failure. Every single one of those engineers quit within the first 2 years, you know? Because as a leader, the patterns that you call out and celebrate in your culture are the ones that will get repeated. The things that you glorify are the things that people will naturally do more of. So paying attention to your culture and your people is not a luxury. It's not a bonus. It's not something that you do after all the engineering, after all the real work is done, right? It's actually critical to your success in this industry. Most startups, most companies fail eventually, right? None of us are going to be at the job we're at now forever. If people love working with you and love working for you, this can be the difference between success and failure for a company, either at this company or the next. Because having people who want to follow you from place to place and who want to work for you is like a superpower. Having people who will vouch for you to their friends and say, yeah, working with that person is awesome and you should trust them, that is incredibly powerful. The competition for engineers in this industry right now is insane. And this is the best way, like just from the most hard-nosed, fuck the people, whatever, just from a pure business perspective, that's clearly the right thing to do. So for each of the engineers in my team, like, I passionately believe, I have to passionately believe that this is the best place for them to be right now, personally, for their career and for their growth as individuals and as engineers. And if I don't believe that, and if I can't fix it, I will tell them, and I will encourage them, and I will help them find something that is better for them. I want them to succeed. I want them to grow. I want them to trust me with their careers as a manager. Because, a few years down the road, when I'm at my next startup, and I'm pitching these same engineers to come work for me again, I want them to believe me when I tell them that I really think this is the best thing for you now. But you have to mean it. Like, it has to be real. It has to come from a place of authenticity. And sometimes that means making hard choices between the trade-offs of what's best for your company and what's best for the people who work for you. It's a balance. There is some tension there. And I'm not going to say that there's a right answer in every situation, but I will say that I believe that investing in your people is always the winning strategy in the long term for ops teams and really any other kind of team. That's basically all I have. I want to give some credit to some people who have really influenced my thinking. That's it.
We've got time for some questions.
Oh, fabulous. Yes, questions?
So what if you are a small organization who's hired people in the optimal fit for a small startup and then you grow or are acquired by something giant? Either way.
Yeah.
What happens there?
That's a really good question. Yes, ma'am. Bridget is asking, what happens if you've hired someone that's really the perfect fit for your small startup and then you grow a lot or you get acquired? Not that that's ever happened to any of us. That's a really good question because organizations change and individuals change. And sometimes the org and the individual grow in the same direction and sometimes they don't. Like, I think about this the same way I think about relationships, right? Like you have friends. You're at the same point in your life. And, your orbits are in sync. And sometimes I'm going to say inevitably, those orbits diverge. And the key is to do it gracefully and empathetically and lovingly, and be very honest. Be like, hey, like, I'm totally honest here. I am a really bad fit for a big company, and yet I've been at Facebook for 2.5 years now, post-acquisition. And it hasn't always been super comfortable. It's been worth it to me to stick around as long as I have because I love my team, I love the product, and I've been able to make adjustments to my behavior and to my lifestyle temporarily. Yeah. Yeah?
Can you give an example of optimizing for the team experience versus customer experience that you talked to? Because I've seen a balance in the past where it's like on-call should not suck complete ass.
Totally.
And that's better for the customer.
Could not agree more. So the question was optimizing for the on-call experience versus the customer experience. So it depends on what your product is, right? If your product is a payments company, you have a very high bar to meet for, and you need to hire engineers who are comfortable with taking that on, Different personality. You do not want someone like me to run a website that needs 5 nines. I will get so angry, like so fast, not interested in that problem set. But a lot of people find that particular challenge really exciting and really fun. On the particular question of how to optimize your on-call rotations, this is why I like, and this is kind of a whole separate topic, but I prefer a world where only end-to-end checks ever page. Individual hosts, individual services, individual anything should not page. You should have a dashboard that people can see when they come in the morning. Well, this is a little degraded, right? But if your customers aren't experiencing pain, does it really matter if 3 of your Cassandra nodes are down? No. Don't page on it, right? So every team should regularly review what is paging us, does it matter, can it wait till morning? Yeah.
Yeah, so you had a slide about how to lose good ops engineers. A few good things on there. But what do you do when you're experiencing those things? You're leading an ops engineering team within a big company, and you experience other people showing that behavior of giving the shitty work, or how do you respond in a nice way?
How do you respond when other people are trying to give your team shit work?
Yeah, or just... Yeah.
If you're the manager, that is your number one job, is not letting that happen. You need to be that shit umbrella, right? So hard. Some engineers on your team will feel comfortable pushing back against those requests. Some of them won't. Some of them are just so nice that they'll do it. And that's not a good thing. It's not a good thing if they just accept the shit work, because over time, they will, even if they don't recognize that it's happening, they will get less and less happy, and they will be less and less productive because they aren't spending time doing things that bring them joy. So this is where process comes in. If this mistake is happening over and over again, you need to get creative with the process. You can insist that all tickets get assigned to you and you triage them. That's a pretty extreme step, but it could get people in the habit of, if 75% of the stuff that they assign to you gets sent right back to them, it could break them of the habit of asking your team to do a lot of pointless, brainless stuff. And sometimes, the people who assign these things, I've seen software engineers who are actually totally happy to set up their own cron jobs. They just actually don't know how. So you kind of need to do a little bit of triage and figure out, why are people asking my team to do all these stupid things? Is it lack of willingness, in which case you talk to their manager? Is it lack of knowledge and experience, in which case you send someone over to sit next to them while they check in their first chef change? You need to find out what's motivating all of the crap that's coming your way.
One more.
Yeah.
Sorry, you mentioned ownership of systems. That's something I have a real problem with. Most teams I've ever worked with, which is, so my question is, what would you define as systems that expect lots of people to take ownership of?
Yeah. The question is ownership of systems. How do you define that? And I think your question is how do you decide who gets paged about what, kind of?
So if I ask all the guys on my team what they own system-wise,
Yeah.
I'll get a completely different answer.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. He's saying that if you ask everyone on the team what they own, you'll get completely different answers. That sounds like a fun problem to debug. Clarity is really helpful here, right? Having everyone on the same page about who owns what is a super valuable exercise. Now, I'll give an anecdote about how we set it up at Parse, which might be helpful. Basically, because I'm there, my team owns databases. At another shop, that might not be true. So basically, our goal is to have all services page their owners, so the API team gets paged about problems with the API tier. The push team gets paged about problems with push services, and so on. And my team gets paged about infrastructure level outages, like AWS problems, or DBA type stuff, because we handle all of the underlying stuff. But like, we don't want to get paged if some other team did a bad deploy of their own code. That's just an extra hop, right? You need to tighten that feedback loop so that people are likely to be getting alerted about the problems that they themselves have caused.
Thank you again.